The dust on Baran 4 got into everything. It got into boots, into food, into the cracks of every weapon, and into the lungs of every soldier who was unlucky enough to be stationed there. Yuna had stopped noticing the dust 3 months ago. She had bigger problems now, like the small Renai cub currently hanging upside down from her left arm, while she tried to carry a medical supply crate with the other. "Get off," she said. She did not mean it. The cub knew she did not mean it. It wrapped its 4 little arms tighter and made a happy rumbling sound deep in its chest. The Renai Frontier School was a low building made of dark stone, sitting at the edge of the settlement like it was not sure it wanted to be part of the town. It had one large teaching room, a storage cellar below, and a yard outside where the cubs played rough games that left claw marks in the dirt. 14 cubs attended the school. Their ages were somewhere between 4 and 10 in human years, though Renai aged differently, and nobody had given Yuna a proper chart. She came here twice a week. It was not part of her orders. Lieutenant Tejo had told her 3 times to stop wandering off to the Renai settlement during duty hours. She had listened politely each time, and then gone back the next week anyway. The truth was simple. The cubs needed basic health checks, and the Renai teachers did not have the right supplements for growing bones and teeth. Yuna was a combat medic. She had the supplies. She was not going to sit in a dusty base doing nothing while children went without. She set the crate down inside the school, and the cub finally dropped off her arm. It ran to the others, and they all came rushing toward her like a small furry flood. The Renai were large beings when fully grown, tall and broad with thick fur, 6 limbs, and golden eyes that seemed to glow in low light. They looked like wolves that had decided to stand up and build a civilization. But the cubs were just children. They were clumsy and loud, and they fought over her attention like puppies. Yuna, they called. Yuna. That was their version of her name. One of the teachers had told her it sounded like a Renai word, but had not explained which one. Yuna did not think much about it. She just liked the way they said it. She knelt on the stone floor and opened the crate. Inside were nutrient packs designed for young Renai, adjusted for their growth cycles. She had spent 2 weeks getting the formula right by reading Renai medical texts that were not translated into any human language. Minji, the communication specialist back at base, had helped her decode the worst parts. The 2 of them had stayed up past midnight, arguing about Renai bone density numbers, until Tejo had walked in, stared at them both, and walked back out without a word. She handed out the packs and checked each cub one by one. She looked at their teeth, their claws, the texture of their fur, and the brightness of their eyes. She could not read Renai vital signs with the same ease as human ones, but she had learned enough. She noticed when one of the middle cubs flinched at a touch near its ribs, and she spent 10 extra minutes checking for a fracture. It was only a bruise from playing too hard. She put a cool patch on it anyway, and the cub puffed up with pride at having a real medical bandage, just like a warrior. Her comm unit crackled. "Sergeant Yuna, this is Lieutenant Tejo. What is your current position?" She pressed the button without looking. "Checking perimeter health assets, sir." A pause. Then Tejo's voice, flat and tired. "You are at the school again." "I am checking perimeter health assets, sir," she repeated. Another voice cut in. Minji, bright and cheerful. "She is cuddling alien puppies, Lieutenant. Let her live." "Both of you are a problem," Tejo said, and cut a line. Yuna almost smiled. She put the comm away and went back to the cubs. The oldest one, a serious young Renai who was already almost her height, watched her from the corner with careful golden eyes. It never rushed to her like the others. It simply watched, as if studying her, as if deciding something. She finished her checks and sat down on the floor with her back against the stone wall. The smallest cub climbed into her lap immediately. Then another curled up against her side. Then 2 more pressed against her legs. Within minutes, She was surrounded by warm, furry bodies and the low sound of contented rumbling. The base was cold and full of soldiers who were bored and restless. The Renai settlement was full of adults who looked at her with polite suspicion. But here, in this small stone room, with these small beings pressed against her, the world was quiet and warm and good. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The smallest cub was already asleep, its forearms wrapped around her forearm like she might disappear. She breathed slowly. She was at peace. Outside the school, the world was less peaceful. 300 kilometers to the north, beyond the dust plains and the broken rock formations, the Vrikari raider fleet had moved faster than anyone expected. Coalition intelligence had predicted months before a serious threat. Coalition intelligence was wrong by several months. The Vrikari did not send warnings. They did not negotiate. They dropped from orbit fast and hard, their landing ships hitting the ground like metal fists. Their targets were simple: supplies, prisoners, and terror. The Renai settlement was rich in all three. The first explosion hit the northern sky like a second sunrise. The ground shook hard enough to crack the school's stone walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. Every cub woke up screaming. Yuna was on her feet before the sound finished. Her body reacted before her mind did. She swept the smallest cub up with one arm and moved to the window. The northern horizon was on fire. Black smoke climbed into the pale sky. She could see the shapes of landing ships descending through the haze, angular and sharp and wrong. Her blood went cold. Then her blood went quiet. That was what happened to Yuna when the world fell apart. She did not panic. She did not freeze. She went still and calm, like the surface of deep water. She pressed her comm. Sergeant Yuna to base. Contact north. I am at the Renai school. I have 14 cubs. Request immediate. Static. Nothing but static. The comms were jammed. She lowered the comms slowly. She looked at the 14 cubs. They were shaking, crying, pressing against each other. The oldest cub had moved to stand in front of the younger ones. Its small claws were out. It was trying to protect them. Yuna looked at the door. She looked at the fire on the horizon. She looked at the children. She made her decision in 3 seconds. She was not leaving. Yuna moved fast. She did not think about fear. She did not think about what was coming. She thought only about the next thing she had to do, and then the next thing after that. First, she moved the cubs. The storage cellar below the school was small and dark, and it smelled like dried grain. But it had stone walls on every side and only one way in. She guided the children down the narrow stairs, one by one, counting each head as they passed. The smallest cub would not stop crying. The oldest cub carried it down without being asked. 14. She counted 14. Good. Next she went back upstairs. The school's furniture was heavy stone and old wood, built by Renai hands for Renai strength. Yuna was human. She weighed 62 kilograms. She should not have been able to move those desks and shelves alone. But she did, because the alternative was not moving them, and that was not an option. She pushed and dragged the heaviest pieces against the 2 doors. She blacked out the windows with torn cloth and supply bags. Her arms burned. Her back screamed. She kept going. When she finished, she checked her weapon. 1 standard sidearm, 4 magazines, 60 rounds total. She stared at the pistol in her hand. She was a medic. She had trained with weapons, of course. Every soldier did. But her hands were built for bandages and injections, not triggers. She had fired in combat exactly twice in her career, both times covering a retreat. She put the pistol in her holster and went back down to the cellar. The cubs were huddled in the far corner, pressed together in a mass of fur and shaking limbs. 28 golden eyes looked at her in the dark. She could see their fear. She could smell it. Renai Young gave off a sharp, bitter scent when frightened, something her human nose had learned to recognize over weeks of visits. She sat down among them. She did not know what to say. She did not speak their language well enough for real words, so she did the only thing she could think of. She hummed. It was nothing special. A low, steady sound from deep in her chest. She had hummed it to herself during long night shifts at the base. A tune with no name that her mother used to hum when Yuna was small and could not sleep during storms. The effect was immediate and strange. Every cub went still. Their ears turned toward her. The crying stopped. The smallest cub crawled forward and pressed its head against her stomach. Then another came. Then another. Within a minute, all 14 were pressed around her, their shaking slowly fading. Yuna did not know that her humming, purely by accident, vibrated at a frequency almost identical to the calming sound Renai mothers made for their young. She did not know that to these children, she suddenly sounded like safety itself. She just kept humming. Above them, the world burned. The sounds of battle came through the stone walls like distant thunder. Explosions, weapons fire, screams in languages she did not understand. The Vrakari were hitting the settlement hard and fast. She could hear buildings falling. Then she heard something closer. Footsteps on the school floor above. Heavy, wrong. Not Renai, not human. She stopped humming. She placed one finger against her lips. The cubs, every single one, went silent, even the smallest. Their golden eyes were wide and bright in the dark. Yuna drew her pistol. She squeezed the oldest cub's shoulder once, a silent message. Stay here. Guard them. She went up the stairs. 3 Vrakari raiders were in the main room. They were tall, thin beings with gray skin and too many joints in their arms. Their armor was patchwork metal. Their weapons were crude but deadly. They were tearing apart the supply crate she had brought, looking for anything of value. Yuna stepped through the doorway and shot the first one in the head. The second turned and she shot it twice in the chest. The third lunged at her with a blade. She felt the edge cut deep across her left arm, a hot line of pain from elbow to wrist. She shoved the pistol against its ribs and pulled the trigger until it stopped moving. The silence afterward was enormous. She stood over 3 dead bodies and breathed. Blood ran down her arm and dripped from her fingers onto the stone floor. The cut was deep. She could see white at the edges. She needed stitches. She needed a proper medical bay. She had neither. She tore a strip from her uniform sleeve and wrapped the wound tight enough to slow the bleeding. It hurt badly. She dragged the bodies out of the way, checked the barricades on the doors, and went back downstairs. The cubs smelled her blood the moment she entered the cellar. They whimpered and pressed closer. The oldest cub looked at the rough bandage on her arm, and then looked at her face with an expression she could not read. She sat down. She started humming again. The night went on forever. Twice more, Vrakari squads found the school. The first time, 4 of them came through a window she had not barricaded well enough. She met them in the narrow hallway and used the stone walls as cover. The corridor was so tight they could only come at her one at a time. She killed 2 with her pistol, and the third with a blade she had taken from the first group. The 4th shot her with an energy weapon. The bolt hit her ribs on the right side, a glancing hit that burned through cloth and skin and left a mark like a brand. She fell against the wall, gasped, raised her pistol with a shaking hand, and fired. The second time, she had almost no ammunition left. 2 raiders came through the front door. She used the last of her magazines on the first one. The second, she fought with the blade in the dark, in silence, because the cubs were sleeping below, and she would not let them wake up to the sound of her dying. She did not die. The Vrakari did. Somewhere in the middle of those hours, during a quiet moment when the fighting had moved further away, the oldest cub came up the stairs and found her sitting against the wall with blood on her hands and her eyes closed. She was not sleeping. She was counting her remaining rounds, counting the hours until dawn, counting the number of ways into the cellar and how she would block each one. The cub sat beside her without speaking. It reached into a pouch at its belt and pulled out a piece of dried meat. Renai emergency rations. It held the meat out to her. Yuna opened her eyes and looked at the offering. She did not know that among the Renai, offering food to someone outside your family was the first step in claiming them as kin. She did not know that this cub was saying, in the oldest language its people had, "You are one of us now." She just thought the child was worried about her. She took the meat and ate it. "Thank you," she said quietly. The cub nodded once, seriously, and went back downstairs. Back at the human base, Tejo stood at the command table and stared at the map until his eyes burned. The comms were still jammed. The Vrakari had hit them hard, and half the base perimeter was damaged. Dohan's squad was holding the eastern wall. They were alive, but pinned. Nobody could get out. Her last position was the school, Tejo said for the 5th time. She has 14 cubs with her, and no backup. Dohyun, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, put a hand on Tejo's shoulder. "She is the toughest person in this unit, and you know it. She is a medic with a sidearm." "She is Yuna," Dohyun said, like that was enough. Dawn came slowly on Baran 4. The sky turned from black to gray to a pale, washed-out gold. The fighting had moved south. The Vrakari were retreating, pushed back by a combined Renai and human counterattack that had broken through during the last hours of darkness. In the cellar of the frontier school, Yuna sat with her back against the stone wall. Her pistol was empty. The Vrakari blade lay across her knees. Her left arm was swollen and hot to the touch. The burn on her ribs pulsed with every heartbeat. She was running a fever. Her vision was going soft at the edges, and all 14 cubs were alive, pressed against her, sleeping peacefully, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. The stone door above crashed open. Light poured in. Renai voices, deep and urgent. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. And then Elder Koron himself, ancient and scarred and enormous, stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at what was before him. A small human woman, covered in blood, holding a blade, with 14 Renai cubs sleeping against her like she was their mother. Yuna looked up at him. Her eyes were glassy with fever. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They are all here. Count them. 14. Then the world tilted sideways, and she fell into the dark. The human field hospital on Baran 4 was not much to look at. It was a prefabricated building made of gray metal walls and hard floors, built for function and nothing else. It had 12 beds, 1 surgical room, and lights that buzzed at a frequency that gave everyone a headache. It was ugly and cold, and it smelled like disinfectant. Yuna had been inside it for 2 days. She had not opened her eyes once. The infection in her arm had spread fast. By the time the Renai carried her from the school to the human base, her skin was hot enough to feel through her clothes. The burn on her ribs had damaged tissue beneath the surface, and her body was fighting on 2 fronts. The medical team had cleaned and sealed both wounds, pumped her full of antibiotics, and hooked her to fluids. Then they waited. Tejo did not wait well. He sat outside the medical bay on a metal crate, his elbows on his knees, his hands hanging between them. He stared at the floor. Every time the door opened, his head came up fast and sharp, like a dog hearing a sound in the distance. Every time a nurse came out instead of good news, his head went back down. Minji brought him water. He did not drink it. She brought him food. He did not eat it. On the second trip, she set the water down beside him and said, She would be angry at you for not eating. She would be angry at me for a lot of things, Taeho said. Then eat so she can wake up and yell at you properly. He drank the water. He did not eat the food. Minji sat with him for a while, saying nothing, which was unusual for her. Then she went back to the communications room because the comms were finally working again, and there were 100 messages waiting. Dohyun came by every hour. He did not sit. He stood in the doorway, looked at the closed medical bay door, nodded once, and left. On his fourth visit, he said, 7. What? 7 dead Vrakari inside the school, all killed by one person. 1 sidearm, 4 empty magazines, 1 taken blade. Dohyun's voice was steady, but his eyes were not. She killed 7 of them, Taeho, alone, in the dark, with 14 children behind her. Taeho said nothing. He pressed his palms together until his knuckles went white. Dohyun left. He came back an hour later and stood in the doorway again. This time he did not speak at all. Word spread. In a military base of 120 people, secrets lasted about as long as ice on the surface of Baran 4. By the end of the first day, every soldier in the unit knew what Yuna had done. The story was told in mess halls, in barracks, on guard shifts. Each telling added weight to what had happened. Not because anyone exaggerated, but because the plain facts were heavy enough on their own. A medic, alone, 9 hours, 7 kills, 14 children, not one scratch on any of them. The human soldiers were proud and shaken in equal measure. Several of them left small things outside the medical bay door. A chocolate bar, a good pen, a handwritten note. The kind of offerings people make when they do not have the right words. But it was the Renai response that changed everything. On the morning of the second day, Taeho stepped outside the hospital to get air, and stopped dead in his tracks. 12 Renai stood in a half-circle around the front of the building. They were warriors, fully armored, weapons at their sides. They stood perfectly still, facing outward, their golden eyes scanning the horizon. They did not look at Taeho. They did not acknowledge him. They simply stood, like they had been carved from stone. Taeho walked slowly toward the nearest one, a huge Renai, with a scar running across the left side of its face. "What are you doing?" he asked. Its voice was deep and rough, its human words broken but clear. "She is Pac. We guard Pac." Taeho opened his mouth. No words came out. He closed it. He turned around and went back inside. By the afternoon, the number had grown to 40. By evening, it was over 100. Renai warriors arrived in groups of 5 and 10, taking positions around the hospital in concentric rings. They brought their full war gear. They brought food and water for a long stay. They were not visiting. They were mounting a guard, and they had no intention of leaving. The cubs came too. Their parents brought them, or tried to bring them and take them home. The cubs would not go. They sat in the dirt near the hospital entrance, 14 small bodies pressed together, and they refused to move. When their parents reached for them, the cubs dug their claws into the ground and howled. In defiance, one of the Renai teachers came to the hospital and asked to speak with Minji. Through the translator, she explained what was happening. When Renai cubs collectively refused a parental command to stay near someone, it was called a cub's declaration. It was not just stubbornness, it was a legal act in Renai society. The cubs were declaring Yuna as their kin guardian, their protector of young. They were saying, in the way their people had said it for 1,000 years, that this person belongs to us, and we will not be separated from her. Minji stared at the teacher for a long time. Then she said, "Does Yuna know about this?" "She is sleeping." "She is going to lose her mind when she wakes up," Minji said softly. The teacher tilted her head. "Why? It is the highest thing our young can give." It is love declared with the force of law. Minji did not have an answer for that. News of the Cubs' declaration reached Elder Koron within the hour. He was in the Renai Command Building, overseeing repairs and counting losses from the raid. When his aide told him what the Cubs had done, Koron went silent. He sat still for so long that his aide thought he had not heard. Then Koron stood and walked to his private quarters. He opened a case that had not been opened in 20 years. Inside was his ceremonial warplate, armor made of dark metal and carved with the symbols of his rank, his battles, and his people's history. This armor was not for fighting. It was for moments that would be remembered. Births of leaders, deaths of heroes, events that changed the shape of the world. He put it on, piece by piece, alone. When Colonel Hyunwoo saw the alert on his screen, his stomach dropped. A Renai general in full ceremonial armor was approaching the human hospital with an honor guard of 20 warriors. Every alarm in his mind went off at once. He reached for the battalion alert. Minji grabbed his arm. She was out of breath. She had run from the communications room. "Sir, stop. They are not attacking." "Then what are they doing?" Minji swallowed. "I think they are honoring her." Hyunwoo looked at her. He looked at the screen. He slowly took his hand away from the alert. Koron entered the hospital without asking permission. His honor guard remained outside. He walked through the hallway with footsteps that shook the floor, past the human soldiers who pressed themselves against the walls to let him pass. He was enormous in his ceremonial plate, a being of metal and old scars, and golden eyes that burned with something no one in that building had a word for. He reached Yuna's room. She lay in the bed, small and pale and still, wrapped in white bandages and connected to machines that beeped in steady rhythm. Koron looked at her. This tiny creature, this fragile human who weighed less than one of his arms. She had stood in the dark for 9 hours and killed 7 warriors, and kept 14 children alive with nothing but a pistol and a hum that sounded like a mother's voice. He dropped to one knee. The floor cracked under the weight of his armor. He bent forward and pressed his forehead against the edge of her bed. The warrior's acknowledgement, given only to those a Renai considers a greater protector than themselves. Koron had never given it before. Not once in his long, long life. Behind him in the doorway, Taeho stood, with his hand over his mouth. Minji was beside him, tears running silently down her face. 3 nurses had frozen in the hallway. Nobody breathed. Outside, 200 Renai warriors stood in perfect formation around the building. The Cubs sat among them, small and quiet and certain. The pale sun of Baran 4 moved slowly across the sky above them all. And inside, in a cold metal room that smelled like disinfectant, a woman who had not yet opened her eyes lay at the center of something she did not know had begun. She did not know that an entire battalion stood guard for her. She did not know that 14 children had declared her family. She did not know that the oldest warrior on the planet had knelt at her side. She just slept, quiet and small, while the world rearranged itself around her. Yuna opened her eyes on the 3rd day, and the first thing she saw was Minji's face, much too close to hers, staring at her like she was checking whether she was real. "You look terrible," Minji said. Her voice cracked on the second word. Yuna blinked. Her mouth was dry. Her body felt like it was made of sand and rust. Everything hurt in a low, steady way that told her she had been given painkillers, but they were losing the fight. She looked around the room. White ceiling, metal walls, medical machines beeping beside her. The field hospital. "The Cubs," she said. Her voice came out like paper tearing. Minji's face did something complicated. It tried to smile and cry at the same time, and ended up doing both. "They are fine. All 14. Not a scratch." Yuna closed her eyes. She let out a breath so long and deep that it seemed to take her whole body with it. For a moment, she did not move at all. Then she nodded, once, and opened her eyes again. How long? 3 days. You had a bad infection. The doctor said another few hours, and they would have had to take the arm. Minji paused. They did not take the arm. Good. I need it. Minji laughed. It was a wet, unsteady laugh, and she wiped her eyes with her sleeve, and did not bother pretending she was fine. Taeho appeared in the doorway. He looked like he had not slept in 3 days, because he had not. His uniform was wrinkled. His hair was flat on one side. He looked at Yuna, and his jaw tightened in that way it did when he was feeling too many things and did not want to show any of them. Sergeant, he said. Lieutenant, she said. They looked at each other. A long, full silence passed between them, the kind of silence that said more than 100 words. Then Taeho nodded and said, Good. You are awake. There is something you need to see. It took a long time. Her legs were weak, and her ribs screamed with every step. Minji held her other side. Together, they moved her to the window at the end of the hallway. Yuna looked outside and stopped breathing. 200 Renai warriors stood in perfect formation around the hospital building. They were in full battle armor, weapons at their sides, facing outward in every direction. They stood like statues, like monuments, like something that had been placed there by the ground itself, and would not be moved by anything short of a god. Beyond them, she could see more Renai, civilians and elders, standing in a wider ring. And among the warriors, sitting on the ground in a tight group near the entrance, were 14 small figures, the cubs. As she watched, one of them looked up at the window, its golden eyes locked on her face. It was the smallest one, the one who had clung to her arm that first day. Its mouth opened, and it let out a sound, a high, clear bark that cut through the air like a bell. The other cubs looked up. They saw her, and the noise they made shook the glass in the window frame. They howled and barked and climbed over each other, reaching toward the building, jumping against the legs of the warriors, who stepped aside calmly, as if this had happened many times before. Yuna's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the glass. What is this? She whispered. Taeho told her about the cub's declaration. He told her what it meant. He told her about Koran coming to her bedside in ceremonial armor and kneeling. He said each thing plainly, without decoration, because Yuna did not like decoration, and Taeho knew her well enough to know that. When he finished, Yuna said nothing for a long time. She just stood at the window, with her hands on the glass, and looked at the army that had assembled for her while she slept. I just did not want them to be hurt, she said finally. That is all. I know, Taeho said. They are just children. I know. She turned away from the window. She did not wipe her eyes, but they were bright and full. She went back to her bed and sat down heavily, and stared at the wall. Far away from Baran 4, in a clean office on a clean station, someone in Coalition Command read the report from the frontier and processed it with the same efficiency they processed everything. A human medic had performed well during a hostile engagement. 14 alien civilians protected. Recommendation: Commendation for Bravery, Level 3, Standard Issue, File and Forward. The paperwork arrived on Colonel Hyunwoo's desk the next morning. He read it with a face that got harder with every line. The same award they gave to soldiers who performed well in a training exercise. He set the paper down and stared at it like it had personally insulted him. That same afternoon, Elder Koran requested a formal meeting. Koran came without his ceremonial armor this time. He came in simple military dress, which for a Renai general was still impressive enough to make every human in the room feel small. He brought one aide and one translator. He sat across from Colonel Hyunwoo and said what he had come to say. The translator spoke the words carefully, making sure every meaning landed. Among the Renai, Koran explained, there was an honor called the Koran Ve, the shield of all children. It was given to a warrior who, alone, defended the young of another clan against odds that should have killed them, and who brought every child through alive at the cost of their own blood. It had been given only 11 times in 800 years of recorded Renai history. It had never been given to someone who was not Renai. The cubs had demanded it. Their declaration was not just a statement of love. It was a formal petition. Under Renai law, when the children themselves asked for the shield to be given, the elders were required to hear the request. Koran had heard it. He had approved it. Then Koran said the part that changed the room. If the humans gave Yuna anything less than their highest honor in return, it would tell the Renai something about humanity. It would say that humans did not value what Yuna had done. It would say that protecting children was not the highest act a human could perform. And if that was true, then the Renai had misjudged the humans entirely, and the alliance between their peoples would need to be reconsidered. He was not making a threat. His voice was calm. He was stating a fact, the way someone states that water flows downhill. It was simply how the Renai understood the world. You could tell everything about a species by how it honored the ones who protected its young. Colonel Hyunwoo listened to every word. When Koran finished, Hyunwoo looked down at the level 3 commendation sitting on his desk. He picked it up. He looked at Koran. He tore the paper in half, slowly and deliberately, and let the pieces fall. "I will handle it," he said. What followed was a battle without weapons. Hyunwoo filed a nomination for the Coalition's Star of Valor, the highest military honor humans could give. It was normally reserved for wars, not peacekeeping missions. His first request was denied within hours. He appealed. Denied again. He went higher. He sent Koran's words directly to Coalition High Command, along with every detail of what Yuna had done, backed by the forensic evidence from the school. Do-hyun organized the unit. Every soldier in the detachment, all 120, signed a joint statement supporting the nomination. Not because anyone ordered them to, because they wanted to. Taeho sat down and wrote a personal testimony. He wrote for 6 hours straight. He described Yuna, not as a soldier, but as a person. He wrote about her sneaking off to the school every week. He wrote about the nutrient packs she had designed by teaching herself Renai medicine. He wrote about the way the cubs said her name, Yuna, and how she never corrected them. He wrote about how she once spent 40 minutes patching a bruise on a cub's ribs, and made the child feel like a warrior. He wrote about a woman who crossed the space between species, not with diplomacy or treaties, but with kindness, patience, and a hum that sounded like a mother's love. He sent it without reading it a second time, because if he read it again, he would not send it. Meanwhile, Yuna knew nothing about any of this. She was in the hospital courtyard, sitting on the ground, with her back against the wall and her injured arm resting in her lap. The cubs were allowed inside the perimeter now, because no one had the heart or the authority to keep them out. They brought her things, small smooth stones from the riverbed, dried flowers pressed between pieces of bark, little carvings made from soft wood, rough and uneven, shaped by small claws. They placed each gift in her lap carefully, seriously, with the focus of children performing a ritual they understood by instinct, even if they could not explain it. Yuna kept every single one. At the end of the 5th day, a transmission arrived from Coalition High Command. It was marked Priority 1. Colonel Hyunwoo opened it alone in his office. He read it twice. He closed his eyes and pressed his hand against his forehead and sat perfectly still for a very long time. It was the first real smile anyone had seen from him in years, and there was no one in the room to see it. Approved. They held the ceremony 2 weeks after the raid, on open ground between the human base and the Renai settlement. It was a flat stretch of dust and pale grass, where nothing had been built. The empty space between two peoples who had lived side by side without truly knowing each other. It seemed like the right place. The morning was cool, and the sky was a color that Baron 4 saved for special occasions. A soft gold that made everything look like it had been painted by hand. Even the dust behaved itself, settling low instead of rising in the usual clouds. Both forces assembled in full dress. The human battalion stood on the western side, 120 soldiers in crisp uniforms, boots cleaned, backs straight, faces forward. On the eastern side, the Renai war host formed their own lines, over 300 warriors in dark ceremonial armor that gleamed under the gold sky. They were enormous and still and magnificent. Between the two formations, a single open space waited. Yuna stood at the edge of the human formation, with her arms still in a sling, and her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her dress uniform felt stiff and strange. She had worn it exactly once before, for a graduation ceremony she barely remembered. Her shoes were too tight. There was a crease in her collar she could not fix with one hand. She was fairly sure she was going to pass out. Minji walked beside her. She looked beautiful in her own dress uniform, her hair pulled back, her posture perfect. She leaned close and whispered, "If you pass out, I will catch you. Probably." Yuna almost smiled. Almost. "And if you cry?" "I am absolutely going to cry. That is not even a question." Behind them, Teho stood in formation with the rest of the unit. He wore his uniform like armor, every button in place, every line sharp. Only Do-hyun, standing next to him, could see the way Teho's hands were clenched at his sides. "Relax," Do-hyun said quietly. "I am relaxed. You are going to break your own fingers." Teho unclenched his hands. He clenched them again almost immediately. Do-hyun sighed and looked at the sky. Colonel Hyunwoo stepped forward into the open space between the two formations. He was not a man who gave long speeches. He believed that words should be like ammunition, used only when necessary, aimed carefully, and never wasted. He stood in the center of that empty ground and looked out at the assembled forces, human and Renai, and he spoke. He talked about the raid. He talked about what was lost and what was saved. He talked about duty and the difference between what a soldier is ordered to do and what a soldier chooses to do. He kept his voice even and his words simple, the way a man talks when he has practiced control his entire life. Then he reached the end, and his voice changed. It did not break. It bent, just slightly, like a steel beam under a weight it had not expected. "Sergeant Yuna did not defend those children because they were Renai," he said. "She defended them because they were children. She did not fight because of orders. She fought because leaving was something she could not do. Not would not, could not. It was not in her." He paused. "That is the most human thing I have ever witnessed, and I have been a soldier for 22 years. He turned to Yuna. She walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The distance between the formation and the center of the field was maybe 30 steps. It felt like 30 kilometers. She stopped in front of Hyunwoo. He held a small case in his hands. Inside, on a bed of dark cloth, lay the Coalition's Star of Valor. It was a simple thing, a silver star on a blue ribbon. It did not look like much, but only 47 of them had been given in the entire history of the Coalition, and each one marked a moment when a single person had held the line between life and death, and refused to step aside. Hyunwoo pinned it to her chest, just above her heart. His hands were steady. His eyes were not. "You earned this," he said quietly, "for her ears only. Every bit of it." Yuna stood straight. She saluted. The entire human battalion saluted with her. 120 arms rising as one, the sound of it sharp and clean in the morning air. Then it was the Renai's turn. The war host parted down the center, and Elder Koron walked through the gap. He wore his full ceremonial warplate, the dark metal armor carved with the history of his people. He moved slowly, not because he was old, but because every step carried the weight of what he was about to do. In his hands, held flat across both palms, was a disc of burnished metal, the size of a dinner plate. Symbols were carved deep into its surface, symbols that told a story 800 years old. The Koron Vey, the shield of all children. Behind him, the cubs appeared. They walked in a line, all 14 of them, from the oldest to the smallest. Someone had cleaned their fur and dressed them in what looked like their best clothes, small wraps of woven fabric in the colors of their families. They walked with a seriousness that was almost painful to see in being so young. They were not playing at ceremony. They understood, in the way children sometimes understand things adults have forgotten, that this moment was real and true, and it mattered. The oldest cub stepped forward from the line. It was tall now, almost as tall as Yuna, with dark golden fur and eyes that looked older than its years. It spoke in the Renai language. Its voice was young but steady. The translator standing nearby listened, and then spoke the words in human language, carefully, making sure nothing was lost. She stayed when she could have run. She bled so we would not. She sang us to sleep, while death walked above our heads. We declare her kin guardian. We declare her mother who chose. We ask the elders to give her the shield, because she was our shield. The words went through the assembled forces like a wave. On the human side, soldiers who had held their composure through the entire ceremony felt it crack. On the Renai side, warriors who had fought in a dozen battles and never flinched stood with their golden eyes shining. Silence. Complete silence. Not a breath, not a movement, not a sound on that whole dusty field. Koron stepped forward and placed the Koron Vey over Yuna's head. It hung on a thick chain, resting against her chest beside the Star of Valor. 2 medals from 2 civilizations, 2 ways of saying the same thing. You held the line. You kept them safe. We see you. Koron spoke. His voice was low and deep, and it carried across the field without effort, the way thunder carries. The translator followed, half a breath behind. 800 years, and no outsider has worn this. Today, there are no outsiders here. He stepped back. He raised his fist and struck it once against his chest armor. The sound rang out like a drumbeat. Behind him, every Renai warrior did the same. The sound was enormous, a single unified strike, like a heartbeat made of metal and stone. A rhythm that the ground itself seemed to feel, a pulse that climbed up through the boots and into the bones of every person standing on that field. The warrior's thunder, a welcome, a recognition, a sound that said, "You are one of us," and you always were. Yuna stood in the center of it all, with 2 medals on her chest and tears running down her face. She did not try to stop them. She did not look away. She stood, and she let it happen, because some things are too big to hold inside. Then the smallest cub broke ranks. It simply walked out of the line, crossed the open ground on its short legs, and wrapped all 4 of its arms around her leg. It pressed its face against her knee and made that low rumbling sound, the one that meant safety and warmth and home. Yuna looked down. She tried to speak. No words came. She dropped to one knee, wrapped her good arm around the cub, and held on. The cub burrowed into her like it was trying to climb inside her chest. Then the other cubs came, one by one, crossing the field, surrounding her, pressing close, until she was at the center of a pile of small, warm bodies, and she was laughing through her tears and holding as many of them as one arm could hold. Tejo, standing in formation, watched. He did not look away. He did not blink. Something in his face shifted, something that had been locked down for a very long time, and he let it stay shifted. Do-yun, beside him, cleared his throat roughly and stared at the sky so hard it seemed like he was trying to read something written in the clouds. Minji had given up completely. She was crying openly, both hands pressed over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. The warrior's thunder continued. The rhythm did not stop. It went on and on, steady and deep, while the two forces stood together on that field, and something old and heavy and wrong quietly dissolved between them. The distance that had always existed between humans and Renai, the suspicion, the cold politeness, the careful separation, it did not end with a treaty or a speech. It ended with a small woman kneeling in the dust, holding children who were not her species and did not care, while two armies beat their hearts in time. From above, if you could see the whole field at once, you would have seen it clearly. Two formations, human and Renai, drawn together like two hands closing. At the center, one person, small and bandaged and bright with tears, surrounded by children. And around her, standing guard with no intention of ever leaving, a battalion that had found something worth protecting more fiercely than any border or base or flag. Her, and the fact that she had stayed. That was all. That was everything.